Princess Charlotte spoke one sentence. The royal guard immediately called for help. The sun filtered gently through tall windows, lighting long corridors that had seen decades of history. Staff members moved calmly from one place to another, speaking in low voices, careful not to disturb the peaceful atmosphere. For them, this was just another day of duty, planned down to the smallest detail. Princess Charlotte was present that day, dressed neatly and walking beside her family. At her young age, she already understood certain expectations. She knew when to smile, when to listen, and when to stay close. Yet, like many children, she also carried a natural curiosity. Her eyes moved constantly, taking in details that adults often ignored. She noticed faces, movements, sounds, and changes in routine. The royal guards were positioned throughout the area. Each guard stood alert but relaxed, trained to appear calm while observing everything. Their job was not only to protect but also to blend into the background. Years of training had taught them how to read a room without drawing attention to themselves. To most people present, the guards were simply part of the setting, as expected as the walls or the doors. The event itself was not unusual. It involved a small gathering, planned weeks in advance. Guests arrived in an orderly way, guided by staff who knew exactly where each person should go. There was quiet conversation, polite greetings, and soft laughter. Everything followed schedule. From the outside, it looked like a perfect example of royal order. Princess Charlotte remained close to her family, but not too close. She had been encouraged to walk independently, to feel comfortable in public settings. A staff member kept a watchful eye on her from a short distance. No one felt concerned. After all, she was surrounded by protection on all sides. As time passed, Charlotte began to grow slightly restless. This was normal for a child. Long events could feel slow, especially when much of the conversation was meant for adults. She shifted her weight from one foot to another, her hands folding and unfolding. Her attention drifted from people to objects, from objects to spaces. She noticed the large doors at the far end of the hall. They were usually closed, but today they were open just enough for staff to pass through. She watched as different people moved in and out. Some she recognized, others she did not. Most wore similar clothing, similar expressions. But to Charlotte, small differences mattered. She also noticed the guards. While adults often saw them as identical figures in uniform, Charlotte could tell them apart. One had a softer expression. Another stood more rigidly. One glanced around more often than the rest. Children often notice patterns without knowing why they matter. As she walked a few steps away from her family, no one stopped her. She was still within view, still safe. A guard nearby noticed her movement but saw no reason to react. She was simply walking, her steps small and unhurried. Charlotte paused near one of the columns. From there, she could see more clearly. She watched a staff member approach a restricted area and then turn back. She noticed a brief moment of confusion on someone's face. It lasted only a second, but to her it stood out. Something about the scene did not feel the same as before. She looked around again, comparing what she saw with what she expected to see. The noise level was the same. The lighting had not changed. People were still smiling and talking. Yet there was a detail that did not fit, something subtle but important. Charlotte felt a small sense of unease, though she could not explain it in words. Children often rely on instinct before logic. She did not feel afraid, but she felt aware. Her eyes followed a movement near the edge of the hall where fewer people stood. A royal guard was stationed there, standing still, watching the crowd. He was experienced, with years of service behind him. His posture was relaxed, but his attention was sharp. He noticed Charlotte standing nearby and offered a polite, gentle smile, as guards were trained to do. Charlotte looked up at him. She hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether to speak. She had been taught not to interrupt adults, especially during formal events. But she had also been taught to speak when something felt wrong. She took a step closer, her small shoes making a soft sound on the polished floor. The guard shifted slightly, acknowledging her presence without lowering his guard. He assumed she might ask a simple question or seek reassurance. Charlotte did not speak immediately. She looked once more toward the area that had caught her attention. Then she looked back at the guard. Her face was calm, serious in a way that surprised him. The guard leaned slightly, lowering his head just enough to hear her without drawing attention. He expected a child's question, perhaps about where her family was or when the event would end. Instead, Charlotte spoke in a quiet voice. It was a short sentence, simple and clear. She did not raise her voice. She did not appear upset. She simply stated what she had noticed as if sharing a fact. The guard's expression changed almost instantly. His training took over. He did not react loudly or suddenly. He did not alarm anyone around them, but something in his eyes sharpened. He straightened his posture, his attention shifting fully to what Charlotte had said. He looked briefly in the direction she had indicated, then back at her. He nodded slightly, acknowledging her words without asking questions. He understood the importance of remaining calm. Charlotte watched him carefully. She did not know why his reaction mattered, but she sensed that it did. She felt a small sense of relief, as if she had done what she was supposed to do. The guard spoke softly, thanking her and asking her to stay where she was for a moment. His voice was steady and respectful, as if speaking to an adult rather than a child. Charlotte nodded and did not move. Without rushing, the guard stepped away, bringing his hand to his communication device. His movements were controlled, practiced. To anyone watching, it looked like a routine check-in. Around them, the event continued as normal. Guests laughed, staff moved quietly, and no one noticed the shift that had just occurred. But beneath the calm surface, something had changed. Princess Charlotte remained by the column, her hands folded neatly. She glanced toward her family, then back to the guard's position. She did not feel scared. She felt curious, aware that something important was happening. This moment, small and almost invisible to others, marked the beginning of a chain of actions. A single observation, a simple sentence spoken without drama, had quietly altered the course of the day. For now, the palace remained calm. No alarm sounded. No one panicked. But attention had shifted, and unseen systems were beginning to respond. And Princess Charlotte, standing quietly in the grand hall, had no idea that her awareness had just set something important in motion. The guard moved away calmly, just as he had been trained to do. He did not rush, and he did not look back. Anyone watching would think he was simply changing position or checking something routine. But inside his mind, every detail Princess Charlotte had shared was replaying again and again. Her sentence had been short, but it was clear. Too clear to ignore. He stepped a few paces away and quietly spoke into his communication device. His voice stayed low and steady. He used simple, professional words, the kind that would not cause concern if overheard. He did not mention the princess by name. He described only what had been observed and where. That was enough. On the other end, the response was immediate. Not loud, not urgent, but alert. The guard was asked to remain where he was and continue observing. Additional eyes would be directed to the area Princess Charlotte had noticed. While this was happening, Charlotte stood exactly where she had been asked to stay. She was not fidgeting now. Her face was calm, her posture still. A nearby staff member noticed her standing alone and started to move closer, but another guard subtly signaled that everything was under control. The staff member paused, confused for a moment, then continued with their duties. Charlotte's eyes followed movement around the hall. She noticed guards adjusting their positions slightly. It was not obvious. No one blocked doors. No one stopped conversations, but the spacing between guards changed just enough to create better visibility. To most people, it looked natural. To trained eyes, it was a quiet response. One guard moved closer to the open doors at the far end. Another positioned himself near a corridor that connected to a service area. None of them spoke loudly. None of them showed concern on their faces. This was how they worked. Calm was part of safety. Charlotte noticed these changes without fully understanding them. She simply knew that the guard had listened to her. That mattered. She felt reassured. Children often sense when adults take them seriously, even if they do not understand why. A moment later, a familiar figure approached her. It was a staff member she trusted, someone who had been around her many times before. The staff member smiled and gently suggested they walk a little closer to where her family was standing. The suggestion sounded casual, like a normal request. Charlotte agreed without question. As they walked, she glanced once more toward the area that had caught her attention earlier. It looked the same as before. People were still moving. The doors were still open. Nothing dramatic had changed, and yet she felt certain she had done the right thing by speaking. The guard who had first heard her words continued to watch closely. He compared what he saw now with what he had seen minutes earlier. He noticed small details others would miss. A person standing where they should not be. A brief pause where movement should have been smooth. Nothing dangerous on its own, but enough to justify caution. Security teams working behind the scenes began checking information quietly. Schedules were reviewed. Access permissions were confirmed. Cameras focused on specific points. Everything happened silently, without disruption. This was how potential issues were handled before they became real problems. Meanwhile, Charlotte was back beside her family. She blended into the group once again, listening as adults spoke around her. No one asked her questions. No one made her repeat what she had said. Her role in the moment remained private. She shifted her attention to something else for a while, watching light reflect off the polished floor, listening to footsteps echo softly. But part of her remained alert. She kept noticing, comparing, observing, the way children naturally do when they feel something important has happened. The event continued. Guests were guided from one area to another. A planned segment was delayed by a few minutes, explained as a simple scheduling adjustment. No one complained. These things happened all the time. Behind the scenes, the adjustment had allowed security to fully resolve the concern. The detail Charlotte had noticed turned out to be a misunderstanding that could have caused confusion later. Someone unfamiliar with the routine had moved where they should not have been, unintentionally creating a gap in order. It was corrected quietly, without embarrassment or blame. The guard who had listened to Charlotte received confirmation through his device. The situation was now under control. He let out a slow breath, careful not to show relief too clearly. He glanced briefly in Charlotte's direction, making sure she was comfortable and safe. She was. He felt a strong sense of respect. Not because she was a princess, but because she had trusted her instincts and spoken clearly. Many adults hesitated in similar moments. She had not. As the gathering moved toward its conclusion, the atmosphere remained pleasant. Guests smiled, thanked staff, and began to leave. Nothing unusual would be reported. No headlines would be written. And that was exactly how it was meant to be. Charlotte walked with her family as they prepared to leave the hall. She felt tired now, the kind of tired that comes after standing and listening for a long time. She did not think about the sentence she had spoken earlier. For her, it was already part of the past. One of the guards stepped aside as she passed. Their eyes met briefly. He gave a small nod, respectful and warm. Charlotte returned it with a shy smile. It was a quiet exchange, unnoticed by others but meaningful to both. Later that day, after the event had ended and the palace had returned to its usual rhythm, a short report was filed. It mentioned a child's observation and the correct response that followed. No names were emphasized. The focus was on awareness, listening, and teamwork. The guard reflected on the moment as he finished his shift. He thought about how easily the sentence could have been ignored, how easily it could have been dismissed as a child's imagination. Training had taught him to listen. Experience had taught him to act without panic. Princess Charlotte, meanwhile, spent the rest of her day as any child would. She played, laughed, and talked about small things that mattered to her. She did not realize that her calm awareness had reminded many adults of something important. Sometimes, the smallest voices notice the biggest details, and sometimes the quietest moments carry the greatest impact. The palace settled into evening. Lights softened. Corridors emptied. Everything appeared exactly as it should. Order had been preserved, not through force or noise, but through attention and trust. And all of it had begun with one simple sentence, spoken at just the right time. As the day moved forward, the palace slowly returned to its usual pace. The guests had left, the event rooms were cleared, and staff members began their quiet routines again. To anyone watching from the outside, it looked like a normal end to a formal gathering. Nothing seemed out of place. Yet behind the calm walls, careful discussions were taking place. The security team gathered in a small room away from public areas. It was not a dramatic meeting. No raised voices, no rushed movements, just calm professionals reviewing what had happened. Screens showed recorded footage from different angles. Times were checked. Movements were reviewed step by step. The guard who had first spoken with Princess Charlotte explained the situation clearly. He described where she had been standing, what she had noticed, and how she had spoken. He did not exaggerate. He did not add emotion. He simply shared facts. Those facts were taken seriously. Other guards nodded as they listened. Some replayed the footage and noticed the same small detail Charlotte had pointed out. It was subtle, easy to miss, and harmless on its own. But in a place where order mattered, even small disruptions were important to understand. The team agreed that the response had been correct. No one had panicked. No one had drawn attention. The situation had been resolved smoothly. That was the goal of good security, not reacting loudly but preventing problems quietly. Elsewhere in the palace, Princess Charlotte was spending time in a familiar space, surrounded by comfort. She was unaware of the meeting taking place. For her, the day had simply been long. She sat with a book, turning pages slowly, her earlier alertness replaced by calm focus. A staff member checked on her gently, asking if she was tired. Charlotte nodded and smiled. She did not mention the earlier moment. It did not feel special to her anymore. Children often move on quickly, carrying lessons without holding onto the event itself. Later, one of her family members joined her. They sat together and talked about ordinary things. No one questioned her about the event. There was no need. The adults understood that making it bigger could change how she felt about speaking up in the future. They wanted her to always feel safe sharing what she noticed. Back in the security office, a senior official spoke briefly. He reminded everyone that awareness came in many forms. Experience mattered, but so did perspective. Sometimes a fresh set of eyes noticed what routine missed. That reminder stayed with the group. As shifts changed and evening approached, guards took new positions. Information was passed calmly from one team to the next. The palace did not sleep, but it did quiet down. Lights dimmed in unused rooms. Footsteps echoed less often. The guard who had listened to Charlotte earlier walked through the corridor once more before ending his shift. He looked around with the same focus as always, but his thoughts were different now. He reflected on how easy it would have been to dismiss her words, how close that moment had come to being just another passing interaction. He felt grateful for his training, for the emphasis on listening rather than assuming. He also felt respect for the child who had trusted her instincts enough to speak. That night, a short note was added to internal records. It did not include names or dramatic language. It simply described an observation, a response, and a resolution. It would later be used as an example during training sessions, reminding new guards that awareness could come from anywhere. Princess Charlotte went to bed that evening like any other night. She brushed her teeth, changed into comfortable clothes, and listened as a story was read aloud. Her mind drifted easily. There were no worries keeping her awake. As she fell asleep, the palace settled fully into silence. Guards continued their watch, staff rested, and systems worked quietly in the background. Everything was balanced, controlled, and secure. The following morning arrived gently. Sunlight touched the same halls as before. Staff returned to work, greeting one another softly. The events of the previous day were already becoming part of routine memory. Charlotte woke refreshed, ready for a new day. She laughed during breakfast and talked about things that mattered to her, small plans, favorite activities, simple joys. Nothing in her behavior suggested that she had played any special role the day before, but the adults around her remembered, not with concern, but with appreciation. They understood that her calm observation had helped keep order without anyone ever realizing it was needed. Later that day, a brief conversation took place between senior staff and security leaders. They discussed how smoothly everything had gone and how important it was to maintain that standard. No praise was spoken publicly. There was no announcement. The strength of the moment had been in its quiet success. The guard passed Charlotte once more in the hallway. This time, he was on duty again, standing near a doorway. She walked past with a book in her hands, barely noticing him. He offered the same gentle smile as before. She returned it without stopping. That simple exchange said more than words ever could. Trust had been built not through authority but through listening. As days passed, the palace continued its rhythm. Events came and went. Guests arrived and left. Security teams worked as they always had, but with a renewed sense of attentiveness. Princess Charlotte continued to grow, learn, and observe the world around her. She remained curious, thoughtful, and aware, guided by both instinct and care. The incident itself faded into the background, remembered only by those who needed to remember it. But its lesson stayed alive. Awareness mattered, listening mattered, and sometimes the most important moments happened quietly, without applause or attention. In the end, nothing dramatic had occurred, and that was the true success. Order had been preserved, calm had been maintained, and a single sentence, spoken simply and heard with respect, had quietly done its work. Time moved on, and the palace continued its steady rhythm. Days passed, filled with scheduled duties, quiet mornings, and familiar routines. To most people, nothing had changed. The halls looked the same, the guards stood in their usual places, and staff carried out their work with care and precision. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet awareness had taken root. The incident involving Princess Charlotte was not spoken about openly, but it had not been forgotten. Among the security team, it became a gentle reminder shared during brief conversations and training moments. Not as a story of fear, but as an example of awareness and trust. New guards were reminded to listen carefully, no matter who was speaking. One afternoon, a small internal review took place. It was calm and thoughtful, not a formal investigation. The focus was on learning, not correcting. The team discussed how smoothly the situation had been handled and how small adjustments had made a big difference. Everyone agreed that clear communication and calm responses were key. Princess Charlotte, unaware of these discussions, continued with her daily activities. She attended lessons, spent time outdoors, and enjoyed moments of play. Her curiosity remained strong. She asked thoughtful questions and noticed details others sometimes missed. It was simply part of who she was. During a quiet walk through the gardens, Charlotte paused to observe birds moving between trees. She stood still, watching patiently. A nearby staff member smiled, noticing how focused she was. It was the same focus she had shown that day inside the palace, though now it was directed toward something peaceful and simple. Inside the palace, the guard who had listened to her continued his work with renewed confidence. He found himself more attentive during routine moments, more aware of small changes. He realized that good security was not about expecting trouble, but about noticing patterns and trusting instincts. One evening, as preparations were made for another small gathering, the guard reviewed procedures once again. He shared a quiet reminder with a colleague about staying observant without becoming tense. The colleague nodded, understanding. The lesson had spread naturally. The gathering itself went smoothly. Guests arrived, conversations flowed, and everything remained calm. The palace operated exactly as it should. No one sensed any tension because there was none. Awareness had become part of the environment, not a reaction to a problem. Charlotte passed through the hallway during the event, guided by a familiar staff member. She moved confidently, greeting people politely. The guards watched with the same respectful distance as always. There was no special attention, no change in behavior toward her. That balance mattered. Later, during a quiet moment, Charlotte asked a simple question about how the palace worked. She was curious about why people stood in certain places and how events stayed organized. The adult listening answered carefully, explaining in simple terms about planning and teamwork. Charlotte listened closely, absorbing every word. That conversation stayed with her. It helped her understand that order came from cooperation and care. It reinforced the idea that noticing things and sharing observations was part of being responsible, no matter one's age. Behind the scenes, senior staff reflected on how important it was to encourage that mindset. Children in such environments often learned quickly from what they saw. By showing calm responses and respectful listening, adults shaped how awareness was expressed. The guard received quiet acknowledgement for his professionalism. It was not a public reward, but a brief note of appreciation. It reminded him why he had chosen this line of work. Protecting others was not always about visible action. Often, it was about prevention. As weeks passed, the memory of the incident softened, becoming part of the palace's collective experience rather than a specific moment. It no longer felt recent, but its influence remained. Charlotte continued to grow more confident. She learned to express herself clearly and respectfully. She understood that her voice mattered, even when spoken softly. No one made a point of reminding her of that day, yet the lesson stayed with her naturally. One quiet afternoon, Charlotte again noticed something small during a routine walk. This time, it was nothing important, just a misplaced item that needed returning. She pointed it out calmly, and it was corrected just as calmly. The exchange felt ordinary, and that was the beauty of it. The palace thrived on such small moments of care. Each one reinforced trust and order. Staff felt supported. Guards felt respected, and everyone understood their role in keeping the environment safe and welcoming. The guard often thought back to the moment when Charlotte had spoken to him. He did not see it as a dramatic event anymore, but as a reminder of why listening mattered. He shared that perspective with newer team members whenever the opportunity arose. Life inside the palace continued with grace and structure. Seasons changed, bringing new events and new responsibilities. Yet the core values remained the same: awareness, calm, and cooperation. Princess Charlotte remained at the center of her world, learning and growing like any child. She laughed, played, studied, and rested. Her life was filled with moments both ordinary and meaningful. The quiet strength of that one sentence she had spoken lived on, not as a story retold, but as a standard practiced. It shaped how people listened, how they responded, and how they trusted one another. And so, without noise or recognition, a small moment had helped reinforce a lasting culture of attentiveness. The palace stood not just as a place of tradition, but as a space where even the youngest voice could be heard and respected. Everything continued smoothly, exactly as it should. Got it. Here is part 4, expanded to 1,300 words, written in simple English, third person, engaging throughout, and with safe, non-violating language only. The days after the incident passed quietly, but inside the palace, something had subtly changed. There was no announcement, no formal meeting with large groups, and no public attention. Instead, awareness became sharper, almost like the air itself had learned to listen. The guards continued their duties as usual, standing at doors, hallways, and entrances. To visitors, everything looked exactly the same. But among the guards there was a shared understanding. They were more attentive to small movements, brief pauses, and quiet details. Not out of worry, but out of respect for how easily small things could matter. The guard who had listened to Princess Charlotte noticed this change most clearly. He found himself observing with a deeper focus, not just watching people, but reading the space around them. He remembered how calm she had been, how clear her words were, and how easily her sentence could have been overlooked. During routine shift changes, guards exchanged short updates. These conversations were simple and professional. They focused on clarity, cooperation, and staying calm. Occasionally, the incident was mentioned in passing, not as a warning but as a lesson. Listening mattered. Every voice mattered. Princess Charlotte, meanwhile, moved through her days unaware of the quiet influence she had had. Her routine was full of learning, play, and rest. She attended lessons, asked thoughtful questions, and enjoyed moments of laughter with those around her. Nothing in her daily life suggested anything unusual had happened. One afternoon, she walked through a long hallway with a staff member who had known her for years. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting gentle patterns on the floor. Charlotte slowed her steps, watching how the light moved as clouds passed outside. She paused near a window and looked out. The gardens were peaceful. Birds moved between trees and a soft breeze stirred the leaves. Charlotte stood silently for a moment, taking it all in. The staff member did not rush her. They understood that moments like this were important. Children often learned best when allowed to observe quietly. Inside the palace offices, senior staff reviewed procedures for upcoming events. These reviews were standard, but now they included a stronger focus on communication. They discussed how information should flow smoothly, how concerns should be shared without hesitation, and how calm responses helped everyone. No one mentioned Princess Charlotte by name during these discussions. It was not necessary. The lesson was larger than any one person. It was about culture, about creating an environment where attention and respect guided every action. The guard received a short message from his supervisor one evening. It thanked him for his professionalism and awareness during the event. The message was brief and private, but it meant a great deal to him. He read it twice before putting his device away. He felt proud, not because he had done something dramatic, but because he had done something right. That sense of pride carried into his work. He greeted colleagues with quiet confidence and remained steady during long hours. He understood that trust was built through consistency, not recognition. Weeks later, another small gathering took place in the palace. It was similar to the one before, though slightly larger. Guests arrived on time, staff guided them smoothly, and guards took their positions. Princess Charlotte was present again, walking calmly beside her family. She seemed relaxed, comfortable in the familiar setting. Her eyes moved naturally, observing everything without effort. The guards noticed her, of course, but they treated her no differently than before. She was part of the environment, not the focus. That balance was important. As the event continued, everything remained orderly. Conversations flowed easily. Movement was smooth. The atmosphere felt calm and welcoming. At one point, Charlotte noticed a staff member looking uncertain near a doorway. It was nothing serious, just a moment of hesitation. Charlotte watched for a second, then continued walking. The staff member quickly adjusted and moved on. No sentence was spoken this time. No action was needed. Awareness had already done its work. Later that evening, Charlotte sat with a book, reading quietly. She paused occasionally to think about the story, then turned the page. Her world was filled with imagination and curiosity, untouched by adult concerns. A family member joined her and asked what she was reading. Charlotte smiled and explained the story in her own words. Her explanation was thoughtful and clear, showing how carefully she paid attention. The adult listened closely, nodding. They recognized the same clarity Charlotte had shown earlier that day and weeks before. It was part of her nature. As the palace prepared for night, lights dimmed and voices softened. Guards continued their watch, walking familiar paths with steady steps. Everything felt balanced. The guard who had listened to Charlotte reflected again on how easily things could have gone differently. How a moment of distraction, or a choice not to listen, might have led to confusion. Instead, calm attention had kept everything smooth. He realized that security was not about control but about care. Care for the space, for the people, and for the quiet moments that held everything together. In the following days, new guards joined the team. During their training, experienced members shared examples of good practice. They spoke about observation, communication, and trust. One guard mentioned a moment when a child had noticed something others missed. He did not share details or names. He simply explained the lesson: always listen. The new guards nodded, understanding the importance of the message. Princess Charlotte continued to grow, learning more about the world around her. She became more confident in expressing herself, more comfortable sharing what she noticed. No one told her to do this. It came naturally, encouraged by the way adults responded to her. One morning, during a walk through the palace, she greeted the guard with a polite smile. He returned it warmly. No words were exchanged, but both understood the quiet respect between them. The palace remained a place of tradition and structure, but also one of learning and growth. Every day brought small moments that shaped how people worked together. That single sentence Charlotte had spoken weeks earlier no longer felt like an event. It had become part of how things were done, a reminder that awareness could come from anyone and that listening was a strength. Life moved forward, calm and steady. The palace stood firm, not because of force or fear, but because of attention and trust. And in that quiet balance, everyone played their part. The weeks turned into months, and life inside the palace continued with its familiar rhythm. Morning light filled the corridors, footsteps echoed softly, and daily routines followed their steady paths. To anyone watching from the outside, everything appeared unchanged. Yet for those who worked within the palace walls, something meaningful had settled into place. The small moment that began with a single sentence had quietly shaped how people listened and responded. It had become part of the palace's way of thinking, not spoken about openly, but practiced every day. Princess Charlotte continued to grow, learning new things with each passing week. Her lessons became more detailed, her questions more thoughtful. She paid close attention when others spoke, often noticing details that were easily missed. Her calm nature remained the same, balanced by curiosity and kindness. She spent time reading, drawing, and walking through the gardens. She enjoyed watching how seasons changed the colors of the trees and how the palace grounds felt different at different times of day. These moments helped her understand that awareness was not about worry, but about presence. One afternoon, Charlotte walked through a quiet corridor with a familiar staff member. The palace was calm, almost still. She slowed her steps and listened to the sound of her shoes against the floor. She paused and looked around, then smiled softly. "I like how quiet it is," she said. The staff member nodded. "Quiet helps us notice things," they replied gently. Charlotte thought about that for a moment, then continued walking. She did not know how true those words were, or how they connected to something she had done long ago. Meanwhile, the guard who had listened to her that day continued his service with steady confidence. His career moved forward as expected, filled with long shifts and careful routines. But his approach had changed slightly. He listened more closely, not just to words but to tone, movement, and space. He often thought about how easily that moment could have been missed. How different the outcome might have been if he had chosen not to listen. That thought guided him quietly through his work. During a routine training session, he was asked to speak to new guards about observation. He did not tell a dramatic story. He simply explained that good security depended on awareness from everyone, not just those in uniform. "Listen carefully," he said. "Sometimes the most important information comes quietly." The message stayed with the group. As time passed, Princess Charlotte became more involved in learning about responsibility and service. She listened as adults explained how many people work together to keep things running smoothly. She learned that every role mattered, whether visible or not. One day, during a small gathering, Charlotte noticed a young guest standing alone, unsure of where to go. She approached calmly and offered a friendly greeting. The guest smiled with relief, and together they joined the others. No one made a note of the moment. No report was written, but it reflected the same awareness and kindness that had shaped everything else. The palace remained a place of careful balance. Guards stood watch without drawing attention. Staff moved with purpose and calm. Events happened smoothly, one after another. Behind all of it was a shared understanding. Listening mattered. One evening, long after most rooms had gone quiet, the guard stood near a window, looking out at the darkened grounds. Lights glowed softly in the distance. Everything felt peaceful. He thought about how his work was often invisible, how success meant nothing noticeable happened, and he felt content with that. He remembered Charlotte's calm voice, her simple words, and how they had changed the course of a day. He smiled slightly, then returned his focus to the present. Princess Charlotte slept peacefully that night, unaware of the lasting impact of her awareness. She dreamed of simple things, stories, colors, familiar faces. Her world was safe and calm. The following morning, the palace woke again. Another day began, filled with routine and purpose. Staff greeted one another. Guards took their positions. Life moved forward. Charlotte walked through the halls with confidence, greeting people politely. Her presence was gentle, her manner thoughtful. Those around her felt at ease, even if they could not explain why. Years from now, the moment would not be remembered as an event. It would not be written into public records or spoken about in speeches. But its lesson would live on quietly, shaping how people listened and responded. The palace stood not just as a symbol of tradition, but as a place where awareness, respect, and calm guided every action. And all of it had begun with a single sentence, spoken softly, heard carefully, and acted upon with trust. Nothing dramatic had followed. No noise, no fear, no attention, just calm, just listening. And that made all the difference.